Building the duck hunt game is going to require a few steps. So I'm going to save out files at different stages along the way so that you have clean ones to work with. So the starting file will be duck hunt 0. So for this basic interactive and this first stage of development where we will have the ducks moving across the screen and then they will be clickable so that we can make them go away, it's going to require us to do a couple things. So I've taken the step of building my artwork. So I've built a movie clip of my duck, and if we look at the duck, you will see that it can flap its wings a little bit. It's just a repeating movie clip. I have my crosshairs that I will be positioning and replacing the mouse and putting these crosshairs in the place of the mouse so you get a better sense of being involved within the game. Again, that's a movie clip. And the final item that we're working with is going to be a dynamic text field. So this text field that we see on screen, I would recommend that you don't use TLF text, but use classic text. And then it's very important, it will default as static text, but we need to change it to dynamic text. Dynamic text will allow us to update that text field content so we can change the actual text in that text field through code as the game progresses. Now, after all of these objects are here, what we can do with those is give them instance names. And we can do it by taking objects on the stage and giving them instance names, or it's also possible to take these objects and dynamically call them to the stage through Actionscript, which is what we will be building towards a little bit later through this tutorial. So in the interest of following along with that, I'm going to do one final step to this artwork. I'm going to take this text field that I have here and I'm going to give it an instance name of score field, and then I'm going to take that and enclose that or wrap that text field inside a movie clip. So if I hit F8 to convert to symbol, I will name this score box. So score box has the text field score field inside of it. And now, having done that, I will be able to add these elements dynamically to the stage. So instead of being lazy and just starting with them on the stage, because when we're playing this we will want to be able to generate multiple ducks to be able to click on to change our score, so I'm going to want to just take control of them right away from the beginning and add them with Actionscript. The next phase is going to require deleting the assets off of the stage and then modifying their properties in the library, because what we're going to be setting up is their Actionscript linkage. This will allow us through Actionscript to be able to call these objects and make them appear on the stage where and when we need them to be part of the game. So to do that, I can be lazy and I can just type in a name under AS linkage, but to better understand what's going on, if you double click on the symbol icon, or sorry, right click on the single icon, then it comes up with the symbol properties, and we need to look at the advanced properties for this. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be selecting export for Actionscript. At this point, it's going to give us a class name, which we will see will populate under AS linkage over in the library. So when I do that and hit OK, it's going to give me this message: a definition for this class could not be found in the class path, blah, 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 blah. And what that's saying is there is no existing Actionscript class that is designated as crosshairs, so it's going to make a default one when it publishes the SWF. The short answer about this is if you check the box, don't show again, and click OK, until you're doing really, 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 really advanced projects, it's not going to affect you, so that's my recommendation. Now we can see it says crosshairs over here. So it's a very common, and this is part of why I also said to always name your symbols with starting with the capital letter. Classes and this Actionscript linkage, this class name, by convention always starts with a capital letter, doesn't allow spaces, it does allow underscores, and it can't begin with a number. So that's why we often will use the camel case naming convention for stringing together multiple words if we need to. So once again, I can right click and choose symbol properties, and then I can click export. For Actionscript, it populated it with the default name that I had as the symbol name, and there it is. And now a third way I can do it would be to just type. So I can just type it in directly at that point. So now at this point, I should see an empty stage. I have in my library 3 symbols, and each one is designated with Actionscript linkage information. This will allow me to then populate my stage with these elements. So I'm going to save and then start working on the Actionscript to be part of my project. Now, just a reminder about this: when you're typing the Actionscript, know that anytime Flash adds in import statements into the code, don't delete them, but at this stage in the game you really don't need to worry about them. Just try to always keep them up at the top of your code so you can forget about them. So it's normal that we will have imports, and I created a comment by putting the 2 slashes. So when you're doing coding, it's very common to make comments in your code so you can understand what's happening a little bit later. And then I'm going to have my variables, and after that I typically will then have my functions that are going to be the actions that are going to actually control or make things happen within my project. And within functions, then I can assign values onto my variables. I can tell Flash to listen for events to occur, such as a mouse click or a mouse movement or a key press or a key release or a mouse release. So I have all these different events that I can listen for, and when those events occur, then they will trigger other functions. So really what happens when you're building an interactive is it's a whole series of functions that happen based on the logic that you put together inside your code. So if I want something to show up on screen or to be able to control something that's on screen, it needs an instance name. That instance name really is another way of saying it's a variable. So first I'm going to start out and say var, which is how we declare we're writing a variable, and I'm going to then type in duck. We're just going to put the duck on screen first. Now Actionscript likes us to type our variables. The rumor mill says that the next iteration of Actionscript is not going to require strict or explicit typing of variables, so I can just say var duck equals something, blah, like a new duck. But currently it prefers us to type our variable so it knows how to assign memory to this variable object. It assign memory as because it's going to contain a number, it's going to contain a string of characters. Like text, it's going to contain a movie clip object. It needs to know what's there. Well, duck was a movie clip. It's a movie clip symbol, so I'm going to just type in movie clip. And when it's highlighted in the code completion, at that point I can just hit the return key, and it now adds that in. Now you'll notice it added in that import statement at the top. If I was typing all of the code myself and typing my own imports, then that import would probably appear under my imports comment, but that's okay for now. So now we have created a little piece of memory, and I'm going to say I'm going to put a movie clip in it, and notice I used the lowercase version of duck. Now it's normal when setting up our project that we start out and assign all the variable or create spaces for all the variables, but then we have a function that we're going to call that's going to then populate those variables with their actual content. But in the interest of seeing something happen first, I'm going to just say new, and now at this point I need to say a new what, and it's going to be a duck, and notice I use the capitalized version, not the lowercase. So var lowercase duck is a new instance of my duck with a capital D movie clip referencing its linkage name. So its actual name here in the library is not that important. The key one thing to watch is the capitalization, lowercase, uppercase. If you make them the same, you will get an error message and Flash will be really grumpy with you. So now at this point, if I save what I've done, if I run my movie, absolutely nothing is going to show up or happen. And it's also giving me a warning about fonts because I have a text field, but I don't have a font in my library, so it's worried that I may not get the characters that I need depending on the system that it plays on. So we will probably want to address that as well, but it's more of kind of just it's a courtesy warning more than it is an actual, oh my gosh, my program's going to stop working kind of warning. So nothing happened because, well, we made a new copy of duck, and duck can actually, it could be flying around on screen or doing whatever we want. The duck has not been added to the stage, so it's never been put on screen for us to see. So to put it on screen, what we have to do is specify add child. And we have to say what we're adding. And if I say add child duck, that now puts duck on the stage and makes it possible for us to see it. And now I'll see there's the duck. And when I put it on screen, it's putting it based on the duck's registration point, and it puts it at 0, 0 unless I tell Flash otherwise. So that means I'm going to probably need to assign an X or Y value to the duck. So I could say duck.x equals, and then I can put it at a number, or I could specify a random number. It really doesn't matter, but I would prefer to see it out of the corner right now. And I can also even put in a relative value. If I wanted it to be centered on screen, I could say stage.stage width, and then I'm going to want it to put it at the middle of the stage, so not the width of the stage. I need to get half of that to put it in the middle. So half of that I can either divide by 2, or I can multiply by 0.5. Now that will give the same result, but the computer calculates multiplication faster than division. For the purposes of the projects we'll create, that's not going to matter, but as you move into more and more complex kinds of projects in your career, you may find that those small performance gains by optimizing what type of arithmetic you use can actually matter down the road. So at this point, I can now also say duck.y, its vertical position, stage.stage height, and then multiply that by 0.5. And then theoretically, if all goes well, my duck will now be flapping its wings in the middle of the screen. So now we're off to a good start. The duck is appearing on stage, but it's not clickable yet. I don't have the crosshairs yet. I don't have my score yet, but I do have a decent beginning. Now these different statements that I've used here, we're actually going to then modify them a little bit in this next setup and put them and close them in functions, because that's going to allow us to have control over how the different states of our application play out. So we can have an introduction state, you can have a game state, a game over state, and then you can start looping through those different states based on how your application is running. So that's where we need to go to next. Now this next installment is going to first address the font issue so it stops pestering us with needing to embed the font. So I'm going into the Scorebox movie clip. I'm going to click on the actual text field, and at this point we need to click under embed, and now I can just call this Trebuchet, and I don't need to embed all the characters, but I will want to do uppercase, lowercase, numbers, and punctuation. And once I've done that for this font, I can click on OK. If we go back to the library, we'll see now Trebuchet has been embedded. Now if I save and run my movie again, it stops giving me that annoying message about, oh, the font, blah, 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 blah. So we've now addressed that issue. All right, so back into the code. So back at the root timeline here, scene 1, root timeline, click under the code. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to modify and move some things around a little bit. I'm going to create a function, and I'll say function setup. And functions that don't return a value, they don't compile something and give us back a new string or a value or a true or false answer, they just do something, return nothing. We always then say void. So we do a function setup, parenthesis, close parenthesis, colon, void, and then I'm going to have my curly braces so I can go like that. Now inside this function, I can now start putting in the information that I want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to modify it so that I create duck up here, but then I populate duck where I say duck equals new duck down here inside that function. Eventually we'll probably not populate duck inside the function, but we will put duck inside a looping function that it will randomly add ducks to random positions at random times on screen, and then they will all be clickable. So we'll work with that. So now I've put duck here, and then I can move all of these lines that I had outside of there and put them into the setup function. Now if I want these to line up or to adjust my kind of alignment of things, I can manually tab them over. I can do command tab or command square bracket to move over, and that indents it. The left bracket moves it one indent left, the right square bracket moves it one indent to the right. Or I could have hit the auto format, which would have done that for me as well. As your code gets more complex, it sometimes is problematic hitting auto format because you've customized the formatting of your code and you don't want it to wreck the beautiful layout that you've put on your code on screen. So this puts my duck on. Now I want to add in my score field, so I have that on screen. So before I do that, I need to say var score box type movie clip, and I'm going to, as long as I'm up here creating variables, var crosshairs, and that will be a type movie clip as well. So now I've created my different variables. Now at this point I can say score box equals new score box, and crosshairs equals new crosshairs. It's very important, once again, to watch your capitalization, lowercase, uppercase, whether when you have multiple words like score box or crosshairs, do you do caps, camel casing in between. It's really critical that you pay attention to that, otherwise you are going to find it very frustrating. And not managing your capitalization or watching your names is going to probably be one of the #1 issues that you run into while you are coding. So now I can save this. Now my score box and crosshairs won't appear on screen yet because I haven't given them positions and I haven't added them to the display list. So different people will like to organize their code in different ways. So I could do all of my duck information here, then do my score box, then do my crosshairs with each one, or I could create all my objects, then create all my X and Y's, and then do a whole bunch of add childs. it's really kind of up to you as to how you desire to organize that. So my score box, I'll set it an X of 20 and its Y equal to 20. That will put it somewhere in the upper left hand corner. And I can finesse that number and position as my project progresses to come up with what I feel is, you know, the ideal position of that score box. And I now need to say add child score box. And now that's going to add the score box to the screen. So you can see how this is a fairly organized way where I have all of my duck stuff, all of my score box. Now I'm going to have for my crosshairs, and I can put that on screen. And now I can say X equals, and now the crosshairs, ultimately we're going to want that to equal the mouse X. So for the time being, it's actually a better position to probably start it is going to be in the center, and we'll move the duck to a new position. So I'll just copy that to be quick with the typing, and then copy that. So that now starts the crosshairs in the middle of the stage. And now we add that to the display list. So when we add child, it's putting it on stage, and the proper terminology is we're putting it on the display list. That's the list of objects that are currently going to be on screen. So if you decide as you're working that you want to learn more about these topics, display list is what we are really working with here. That's the big thing that Flash has that a lot of other languages do not, is it has a display list which allows you to help kind of manage the visual assets that you currently will have on screen. So I'm going to put my duck not there, but instead I'm going to just put it into a random position. And we can see the code hinting is helping me out here, so I'll hit return. So I'll choose a random number. Math.random generates a random number between 0 and 1. So to get a random number through a certain number range, all I have to do is then multiply this value between 0 and 1 times the range I want that number to exist within. So if I want this to be somewhere on stage vertically, then I could multiply this by the stage height. So I can multiply it by that value. That will put this somewhere on screen. Now, the problem that I could run into is this could put the duck appearing randomly at the underneath the score box, or it could be almost all the way off screen because it's registered on its center. So we might want to put some kind of temper that a little bit. So to do that, to tighten that up a little bit so it's not the full height of the stage, we need to reduce it by a certain amount. So I'm going to reduce it by 100, and then I'm going to add back 50. So what this does is this will make sure that the duck appears somewhere between 50 and the height of the stage minus 50. So it kind of can be a little bit confusing, but once I put the parentheses in, hopefully it makes a little bit more sense. So if you take the height of the stage, which in this case is 400, subtract 100 from it, that's 300. Math.random times 300 will give me a value between 0 and 300, and then I add 50 to that, so now that means my possible y values are 50 to 350. If it hurts your brain thinking of it in this way, then I recommend that what you do is you just use it as is for now, and as you type it in multiple times over and over again, it will probably start to make a little bit more sense. And we'll do the same thing to the width here. We take 100 off the total value, but then we add back 50. So that now puts the duck somewhere within a 50 pixel margin of the edge of the screen. And again, we're talking about the duck's registration point, not its actual full value. We could complicate this even more by adding in the width of the object and height of the object and all of that, but we're not going to concern ourselves too much with that at the moment. So now I'm going to save this, and if we run this, what we'll see is nothing happened. No error messages, but now nothing is on screen. So we may feel a little bit cheated that nothing's occurring on screen when we had something happening before. But the key thing to remember here is I have my variables. I have now all of my functionality included in the setup function, but the one thing that we have not done is we have not called the setup function. So I now need to actually say run setup. And we do that just by saying setup like this. And that is now a function call. So that calls this function and tells it to run. And when I do that, I will see there is my duck, there are my crosshairs, there's my score. If I do it again, we'll see the duck's in a new location, new location, new location, new location. So we can see it seems to be working. I think I'm going to move the score up a little bit. That seems to be a little too far down. I forgot when I originally created it, the score had its registration point. Oh no, it's in the top left corner, so I don't know. But I'm going to shorten that up to 10 because that looks just a little bit better, a little more balanced on screen. So now the next trick is to get that crosshairs to actually start following my cursor. So we're on track. We've now been able to put everything on screen. We're using random positions of it. We're using relative positions of stage width and stage height, and having function calls. So we're well on our way to a great project. The next stage of the game is to start adding in functionality so that we can effectively have a continual running loop that then runs every frame, and as that happens, then we're able to say make the crosshairs follow the mouse, make it so that we can update the score when I click on it, have more ducks appear on screen. So we have all kinds of new things that we're going to be working towards now. So the first is to tell this project that we need to say add event listener event dot enter frame, and I'm going to call this loop. Now this loop is going to be a function that's going to run, and it will run every frame, but it won't start running until after setup puts all the stuff on stage, then it starts running. And if you notice, I'm just keeping setup at the bottom. I like that from an organizational standpoint of the final thing I want to have happen once I get all of my functions, variables, everything squared away. Then I call my starter function, which is setup, which gets the whole ball rolling. So I can say function loop, and this function I need to, because it's tied to an event, I need to specify that type of event here. So I'd say e:event, and I will notice that it did now give me another import up there. And this does not return anything, so it's a void. And now I can put information into this loop. So an easy way to work with this is I can say crosshairs dot x equals mouse x, crosshairs dot y equals mouse y, and if I do that and run it, we'll notice that the crosshairs are relatively keeping up with where my mouse is on screen. Now what's not so nice is actually seeing the mouse. So we may wish to hide the mouse when the game is running so we only see the crosshairs. That just looks a little bit better. So that's something that really could happen up in my loop section, or in my setup section, because under setup that's where I'm really setting things up. So I'll say mouse.hide, and when I do that, which I think because this didn't turn blue, it will be a capital M. If I run this, we'll see the crosshairs are there. They move as I move the mouse around, but I do not see the pointer any longer, not until I go outside of my stage. So good. The mouse is now hiding. Crosshairs are following it. And at this point, we now need to think about trying to make the duck clickable and make something happen when I click on it. So first off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to assign the clicking event directly to the duck, and then we will modify it so we can add multiple ducks and check to see if I clicked on a duck versus something else, and then at that point it will act accordingly. So and notice I'm putting in extra returns to space things out. It makes it look easier. It's easier to read the code. You don't have to, but I strongly recommend you do that. I also recommend, if you feel the need, to add in more comments into the code to help you understand what they're doing. But a lot of these things should be fairly self-explanatory. Mouse.hide, the event listeners, until you're used to that, you might want to put in some comments to help remind you of what's going on with those. So what I can do with my duck here is, because this is going to be assigned to the duck, I can say duck.add event listener, and now my code hinting, because I've added enough imports, now it's helping me out here. And I'm going to have a mouse event dot click. I could have a mouse down, could have a mouse up, but we'll just go with the simplest version, which is click at the moment. And this will call a function that I will declare as duck click. So the duck is now listening to be clicked on. I can say function dot click, and it'll be a e:\mouse event because it is tied to a clicking operation. So at this point, what I want to do is to, when I click on the duck, I want to change the score that I have on screen. So it would be nice if I could actually know and track a score, which means what we really need to have is another variable. So going up to my variable section, say var score, and then it is going to be, score will be an integer because I'm not going to have fractional scores. I'm just going to have whole numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, blah, blah, blah. So with that, I type in int. Oh, and it's lowercase int. There we go. Like that. Now, when my game starts, it would make sense to initiate the score with a value of 0. Score equals 0. So I created the variable, assigned it a value of 0, and now what I'm going to do at this point is say score box dot. Now we have to remember the instance name of the text field inside score box, which was score field. And now we're changing its text property. So we'll say dot text equals, and now I need to assign what I want it to be. So I'm going to, inside quotation marks, I'll say score colon space end quotation marks, put a plus sign, and then I'll type in my score variable. So every frame, it's just going to be updating the text in that score field. When I click on the duck, I'm going to make score increase in size. So I'll say score, and I want to say score is now 1 bigger than score was before. So that's the same as saying score is now equal to the current value of score plus 1. Now there's a shorthand way of writing that in programming of score plus equals 1. And you don't need the spaces there, but I put that to make it just a little bit easier to understand. And if I didn't comment that out, every time I scored, I would score 2. Oh, and you do have to also spell things correctly. Score plus equals 1. So that adds 1 to whatever the current value of score is, which I started at 0. And then every time I click on the duck, it's going to go up by 1. So if I save this and run it, no error messages. Now we can see the score is going up, 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 up. So that's good. Our project is now working. What would be more fun is to have more ducks, and then when I click on a duck, the duck I click on goes away, but the new ones keep coming, so I can work on getting a bigger score. Some of you may be finding that as you try to make your project work, so you test your movie, and you click, and your score doesn't go up. And what may be happening as part of that, and I will demonstrate by modifying my crosshairs here, if your crosshairs have artwork that covers the registration point, so it's a solid pixel where the registration point is, like what I've just created here, if I run this and click on the stage, nothing, click on the duck, nothing. I can't click through my crosshairs object. So what I would need to do is I would need to find a way to make that crosshairs ignore being clicked on, so when I click, it's registering the click on whatever's underneath the crosshairs. And it's a fairly simple little bit of code, and I just say crosshairs dot mouse enabled equals false. So I'm telling the crosshairs that they will disregard any mouse interaction in terms of clicking. So they just flat out ignore it. So now if I click, my score goes up on the duck, nothing on the stage, so I am in good shape now. So if you are running into that problem, so that your crosshairs are too big, fat, bulky, or cover that registration point, and the crosshairs that, if you want to have the easiest coding, do make sure that they're relatively centered on the registration point. That's going to give you the best option. So I looked at when I first made them that mine weren't quite centered, so it was registering that empty pixel just off the center, so it worked out pretty well. But if I did make these so they cover that, so I'll move them over, so now it is covered. If I comment out the mouse enabled line, I'll find that I cannot click on my duck and make it work. But if I close it, bring it back, and enable my mouse again, or disable mousing, now it works. So that's just a little gotcha to be aware of while you're working with it, is you have to pay attention to the mouse enabled part. Otherwise, your crosshairs will interfere with making the ducks clickable as part of this. So now my score goes up by modifying the text property of the score. The crosshairs follow the X and Y. The duck, when I click on it, I will see it go up by 1 more than whatever the current value was. So we're off to a really good start. The duck's on screen, the duck's clickable, I'm getting a score. The next thing that would be nice is to make it so that the ducks appear on screen and continue to keep appearing on screen, and when I click on a duck, then that duck goes away. And that's what we will do next. Making the ducks appear randomly means we're going to take the code here, pull this out of the main setup function, and we will put that into a enemy spawn or duck spawn function. So I'm just going to go down here and say function duck spawn. Now if I want a more generic, typically the things you're clicking on are enemies or targets, so I could say enemy spawn, and it doesn't return anything, so it's a void. And now under enemy spawn, what we need to do is we don't want to spawn a new enemy every single frame. We want it to do it into some sort of randomness, so you feel that they're just kind of appearing, but not under any type of actual schedule, but not too frequently, but not infrequently. So it's a matter of fine-tuning those values, but we need to use a conditional to find out when we should spawn them. So if I say if, and now the condition I'm going to say is if a random number is equal to something. So if I say math.floor, so this is rounding down something, and I'm going to say math.floor, and then in the parentheses I'll say math.random, and if my floor of my random times a value, and we'll start out with a value of say 50. So what this does is this takes and rounds the number down. So I'll get a number between 0 and 1 times 50, so I'm getting a random number between 0 and 50, and it's rounding it down. And if by chance it gives me a number that is equal to, and when I'm comparing two values to say is one equal to something else, I use two equal signs, not one. And then if I'm going to say equal to 0, and again the extra spaces just make it look prettier, but they don't have any bearing on functionality. So if math.floor of math.random times 50 is equal to 0. Now if this means the ducks don't come out frequently enough, I just make 50 a smaller number, so I'm more likely to round down to 0. And so when that occurs, now if that happens, then what I want to do is I want to make a new duck. So in this instance I'm going to remove this from up here, and sometimes when you're doing reorganization of your code, and also called refactoring to make it do something else, you don't necessarily completely move or delete, but what you do is you copy something, you comment out the original, and then that way if you realize you botch it along the way, you can go back to it without having to go, shoot, what did I copy paste, how did I delete, and it freaks you all out. So I'm going to copy this line here and then comment it out, go into down here, and I'll paste that in. Now if I need to move this over again, command square bracket a couple times, that moves it over. And now we're going to combine that with all of this duck information. I'm going to leave this event listener here, and we'll make sense about why in a little bit. So copy that, comment it out. So it doesn't break anything, I'm going to comment that out. So currently our ducks won't be clickable anymore, but right now I just want more ducks to start appearing on screen. So now I'll go here, paste, and at this point. So what this does is this will create a new duck when that's true, and then it will randomly put it on screen, add it to the display list. So that now puts my duck on the stage. So now if I save this and run it, we'll see we should randomly, if we're lucky, or not, because I forgot to ever call enemy spawn. Every frame of the movie is when I want to be calling it. So I call the enemy spawn function, but it won't generate a duck every frame, but it will do it periodically. So we should see there's one duck. If I wait 2, 3, and now they're starting to. Oh, so maybe 50 is a little too high a number because they're not appearing very frequently. If I want to be able to have to click quickly or rapidly, I would want to modify that number and maybe say down to 30. Now if I put it up, we should see the ducks occurring more frequently. But it's still random, that sometimes you'll get a whole bunch at once and then you'll have a stretch with nothing. But it gives you that panic response of, oh, I gotta click now, which can make a clickable type game exciting to play. So now that's putting the duck on stage. Now one thing I could do is I could tell the ducks to listen to being clicked, and then when I click on them they add to the score. But when I do that, what I need to pay attention to is it gets a little bit messy in terms of every duck has the click listener attached to it, and then making the duck go away, but then that click listener, I have to also get rid of that, and it becomes this pain. So what would be nice is if I could just tell my whole project, hey, why don't you just listen for clicks and then figure out if I clicked on a duck, and if I clicked on a duck, then we will go ahead and add to the score. So what I can do is, instead of registering this listener with duck, what I can do is I can just register the listener with the stage. Now, when I do that, currently, if I run this and clicking on the stage adds to my score as part of it. Now we also are noticing another problem, that the crosshairs are appearing behind the ducks, and that's not good. That's not good at all. So one thing about that is add child. When you add something to the display list, if you add that object to the display list again, it goes on top of everything else that's already there. So really what we can do is we can just take this line, bad crosshairs, and put that after enemy spawn, so that no matter how often the enemies are spawning, crosshairs will always now be added every frame so that it's sitting on top. But currently I want it to register clicking not on the stage but on the duck. So we need to find a way to track that. So instead of making duck click happen like this, what we could possibly do is throw it into another conditional. And I can say, so if, and now I need to find out what I clicked on. So if what I'm clicking on, so if that target, so if what I'm clicking on, and we can reference in that by saying the target of this event. So the event is the click, the mouse event click, and if the target of that, and we can say is, well, if we remember what we're looking for is it a duck, as referenced over here on the, in its linkage. So is it a duck? So we just say if target is duck. It really is that simple. Then we put a curly brace here. Go down and put another curly brace. And now I can just move that over. So if what I clicked on is a duck, my score goes up. So if I run this, what I will see is click on the stage, nothing, move over a duck, and boom, 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 boom. Now what would be better is to make that duck go away. So when I click on the stage, if what I'm clicking on is a duck, I want my score to go up and I want the duck to go away. To make the duck go away, I can simply say at this point e.target. So because I don't know, I mean the duck on screen, I don't know, is it instance 1, is it 2, 3, 4? I have no idea which one. And I don't need to know, I just need to say, the thing I'm clicking on. And then I have to tell its parent to remove it. Objects are not allowed to remove themselves, so I can't just say remove child and list the object I want to get rid of. I have to tell the parent of the object to do it. So I have to say the thing I clicked on, its parent to remove child, like this. e.target.parent.remove child, parenthesis, e.target, close parenthesis, semicolon. So when I do that, hopefully all will go well and it goes away. Now I can't click anymore there, but if I click here it goes away, and if I keep clicking in that spot there's nothing to click on because it's empty, and then click, boom. So I can now start getting rid of those. So to recap that, this duck click is now just registered with the whole project itself. And now that I know my project's working, I don't need to keep some of these commented lines, so I'll get rid of those as part of it. Just cleaning up. So we have imports, it put those in for me. I have my variables. And I'm telling my movie to listen for clicking, put on my score, put on the crosshairs, tell the crosshairs not to listen to mouse events so we can click through them. Hide the mouse, set the score to a starting value of 0. Then we tell loop to start going. Now loop makes the crosshairs update to the mouse position, updates the score, and then it runs enemy spawn, and then it re-adds the crosshairs, so it always keeps the crosshairs on top of everything else. Now enemy spawn will take when a rounded down random number between 0 and 30 is equal to 0. So theoretically, if this is running 24 frames a second, I'm generating 24 random numbers per second. So if I change that to 24, theoretically it would be kind of, any, once per second I could expect to see a duck appear, if it truly was just cycling through randomly. But, it will go in bursts, long bursts, short bursts. And then when that occurs, it creates a new duck, puts the duck on the stage, adds it to the display list. And then when I click on screen, now the whole movie's listening for a click, and it calls my duck click, and then it says if the target is duck, it adds to my score and it removes that individual duck I clicked on using e.target.parent.remove child e.target. So I know that's a mouthful, but it now is putting us on track to doing a lot of really exciting, complex projects.